The small town of Ridgewood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Life moved at a slow pace and nothing much ever happened to shake things up. Until Lucas arrived. He was the new kid, a quiet boy with messy brown hair and an old backpack that looked like it had seen better days. On his first day at Ridgewood High, he walked through the school gates without making eye contact with anyone. His clothes weren't flashy, they were simple, almost too plain for a high school student. His sneakers weren't expensive or branded, they were worn out as if he'd been wearing them for years. It didn't take long for the other students to notice him. By lunchtime, whispers about Lucas spread like wildfire. "Who is he?" one girl asked her friend in the cafeteria. "He's so weird," another replied, wrinkling her nose. The truth was, Lucas didn't fit in. He didn't sit with any particular group during lunch. Instead, he found a quiet corner of the cafeteria, pulled out a book, and ate his sandwich alone. No one invited him to join them, and he didn't seem interested in joining anyone else. To the students of Ridgewood High, Lucas was an outsider, and outsiders were fair game. On his third day at school, Lucas became the center of attention, not because he wanted it, but because of what happened after gym class. Gym was always chaotic, especially when the football team was involved. They strutted around like kings, laughing loudly and showing off their strength. That afternoon, as Lucas walked back to the locker room by himself, 4 older boys from the team spotted him. Their leader, Jake, smirked. "Hey, new kid," he called out. Lucas froze for a moment, then turned to look at them. "What do you want?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise in the hallway. Jake stepped closer, his friends following behind him like loyal followers. "We just want to talk," Jake said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Before Lucas could respond, one of the boys shoved him lightly on the shoulder. Lucas stumbled but didn't fall. He straightened himself and glared at them, his jaw tightening. For a brief moment it seemed like he might fight back, but then he lowered his gaze and said nothing. That's when the real trouble began. Emboldened by Lucas's silence, the boys closed in on him, forming a circle. One of them pushed him again, harder this time. Lucas stumbled into another boy who shoved him back with a laugh. "What's wrong, new kid, you scared?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. The boys laughed, shoving Lucas between them like some cruel game of catch. Each push sent him stumbling in a different direction, and each time he tried to steady himself, someone else knocked him off balance. By now, a small crowd had gathered to watch. Some students cheered the bullies on, while others watched silently, unsure of what to do. Teachers were nearby, but none of them intervened. They glanced at the scene briefly, then looked away, pretending not to notice. After all, it wasn't unusual for the football team to pick on someone weaker. It happened all the time. Why should this be any different? Finally, the boys grew bored of their game. With one last shove, they sent Lucas sprawling onto the floor. He landed hard, his book scattering across the ground. The laughter around him grew louder, echoing in his ears as he lay there staring at the ceiling. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then slowly, Lucas pushed himself up onto his knees. He didn't cry or yell. He simply started gathering his things, his hands trembling slightly as he stuffed his books back into his bag. No one offered to help him, not even the teachers. When Lucas finally stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans, the crowd began to disperse. The boys who had bullied him sauntered away, still laughing and high-fiving each other. Lucas watched them go, his face expressionless. Then he slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the hallway without looking back. That evening, word spread quickly through the school about what had happened. Most students thought it was funny, just another story about how pathetic the new kid was. They joked about it in the hallways, mimicking the way Lucas had fallen to the floor. Even the teachers who had witnessed the incident shrugged it off, assuming it was just kids being kids. No one expected anything more from Lucas. After all, he was just the new kid, a nobody who wouldn't last long in Ridgewood. But little did they know, things were about to change. Lucas may have kept quiet that day, but silence can be deceiving. Beneath his calm exterior, something stirred. Something powerful. Something dangerous. And soon, the entire school would learn just how wrong they were to underestimate him. The next morning, Lucas walked into Ridgewood High as if nothing had happened. His bruised knees and scraped palms were hidden beneath his jeans and long sleeves, and his face showed no sign of anger or sadness. He carried himself the same way. He always did. Quietly, almost invisibly. But the school was buzzing with talk about him. Whispers followed him wherever he went, like a shadow he couldn't shake. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" One girl whispered to her friend, in the hallway. "Yeah, those guys totally beat him up," her friend replied, glancing at Lucas as he passed by. "He didn't even fight back. What's wrong with him?" Some students thought Lucas was weak, a pushover who wouldn't stand up for himself. Others weren't so sure. There was something unsettling about the way he stayed calm, almost too calm. It was as if he didn't care what people said or did to him, and that made them curious. Why wasn't he fighting back? Why wasn't he crying or yelling or trying to get revenge? By lunchtime, the rumors had grown wilder. One group of students claimed they saw Lucas talking to himself under his breath during math class. Another swore they heard strange noises coming from his house late at night. A boy named Matt, who lived 2 streets away from Lucas, told everyone that he'd seen a black SUV parked outside Lucas's house every evening. "It's probably his dad," Matt said dramatically. "I bet he's some kind of secret agent or something." The more the students talked, the more outrageous the stories became. Some thought Lucas was hiding money. Maybe his family was secretly rich and he didn't want anyone to know. Others believed he was involved in something criminal like smuggling or hacking. A few even joked that he might be an alien, sent to Earth to spy on humans. No one knew the truth, but everyone had an opinion. Curiosity got the better of some students, and they decided to confront Lucas directly. After school, a group of 3 boys approached him as he stood by his locker. "Hey, new kid," one of them called out. "Why are you so weird?" Lucas turned to look at them, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a calm voice that sent chills down their spines, he replied, "You wouldn't understand." The boys exchanged nervous glances. They had expected Lucas to snap, to yell, or at least show some emotion. But instead, he just closed his locker, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked away without another word. That night, the rumors reached new heights. Students texted each other furiously, sharing theories and speculations. Teachers overheard snippets of conversations in the hallways and began to wonder if there was any truth to the stories. Even Principal Harris, who usually ignored gossip, started paying closer attention to Lucas. She noticed the way he kept to himself, the way he never raised his hand in class, and the way he seemed completely unfazed by the bullying. Something about him felt off. The turning point came on Friday afternoon. It was the last period of the day, and the entire school was restless, eager for the weekend to begin. In homeroom, Mr. Thompson called roll as usual. When he reached Lucas's name, he paused, waiting for the typical here or present. But this time, Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent as every eye turned to him. "My dad will be visiting the school tomorrow," Lucas announced in a steady voice. His words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. For a moment, no one moved. Then laughter erupted from the back of the room. Someone shouted, "Yeah, right, like your dad cares about this dump." But before anyone else could say anything, the classroom door opened and Principal Harris stepped inside. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a piece of paper. She looked at Lucas, then at the rest of the class. "It's true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas's father is coming to the school tomorrow." The laughter died instantly. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Students exchanged wide-eyed looks, unsure of what to think. Who was Lucas's father? Why? Was he coming to the school? And why did Principal Harris look so terrified? As the bell rang and students filed out of the classroom, the questions only grew louder. By the time Lucas left the building, the entire school was abuzz with speculation. Some thought his father must be a celebrity, a famous actor or musician. Others guessed he was a billionaire, someone so wealthy that Ridgewood High would seem insignificant to him. A few students even suggested he might be a criminal, someone dangerous enough to make the principal panic. No one slept well that night. The idea of meeting Lucas's father filled everyone with a mix of excitement and dread. What would he be like? Would he be angry about what had happened to Lucas? Would he punish the bullies or worse, shut down the school entirely? The next morning, the atmosphere in Ridgewood High was tense. Students arrived early, eager to see what would happen. Teachers paced nervously in their classrooms, double-checking lesson plans and tidying up desks. Principal Harris locked herself in her office, making frantic phone calls while clutching the same piece of paper she'd held the day before. At exactly 9 a.m., the auditorium doors swung open, and the entire school fell silent. Everyone turned to look as a tall, imposing man entered the room. Dressed in a sleek black suit, he exuded authority with every step. His piercing gaze scanned the crowd, silencing even the rowdiest students instantly. Principal Harris introduced him nervously. "Students, meet Mr. Alexander Kane." The name hit like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed throughout the auditorium as realization dawned. Alexander Kane wasn't just any name. He was a global icon, known for dismantling corrupt governments, exposing scandals, and commanding unimaginable power. And now, he was standing right there, glaring at the sea of shocked faces. For the first time in their lives, the students of Ridgewood High understood true fear, not the kind inflicted by peers, but the kind wielded by someone untouchable. As Mr. Kane took the stage, the entire school braced itself for what was about to come. The moment Mr. Alexander Kane stepped onto the stage, Ridgewood High transformed into a place of eerie silence. Every student sat perfectly still, their eyes glued to the man whose presence seemed to fill the entire auditorium. He didn't smile or wave. Instead, he stood there with an expression that could freeze water. His sharp suit and polished shoes made him look like someone who belonged in a boardroom or on the front page of a newspaper, not in a small-town high school. Principal Harris introduced him nervously, her voice shaking as she said his name. When she finished speaking, she practically ran off the stage, leaving Mr. Kane alone under the spotlight. For a few seconds, he simply stared at the crowd, letting the weight of his gaze sink in. Then, without hesitation, he began to speak. "Good morning," he said, his deep voice echoing through the room. "I am here today because I received reports of unacceptable behavior toward my son." Every head turned toward Lucas, who sat stone-faced in the front row. No one dared to whisper or even breathe too loudly. Mr. Kane continued, his tone calm but firm. "Let me make one thing clear. I do not tolerate bullying. Not in my family, not in my business, and certainly not in this school." His words sent a chill down everyone's spines. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with both Mr. Kane and Lucas. Teachers exchanged worried glances, realizing they had underestimated the situation. This wasn't just a routine parent visit. It was a reckoning. Mr. Kane pulled out a folder from his briefcase and opened it carefully. Inside were printed documents, photographs, and even screenshots of text messages. "Over the past week," he explained, "I have gathered evidence of the harassment my son has endured. These are names, dates, and details, all verified and documented." He held up a photograph of Jake and his friends shoving Lucas in the hallway. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the audience as students recognized themselves or their classmates in the picture. Mr. Kane placed the photo back in the folder and took out another document. "This is surveillance footage taken outside the school," he said, nodding toward the projector screen behind him. A video began to play, showing Jake and his gang surrounding Lucas, laughing and pushing him around. The recording was clear enough to identify every face, every shove, every insult. As the video played, guilt spread across the faces of those involved. Jake sank lower in his seat, his cheeks turning red. Others looked away, unable to meet Mr. Kane's piercing gaze. Even students who hadn't participated in the bullying felt uneasy, knowing they had witnessed it and done nothing to stop it. When the video ended, Mr. Kane turned off the projector and faced the crowd again. Now that we've established the facts, he said, his voice colder than before, let us discuss consequences. Consequences. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Everyone knew what it meant, but no one wanted to hear it. For those responsible for harming my son, Mr. Kane continued, there will be repercussions far beyond detention slips or suspensions. Parents will be contacted. Records will be flagged. Futures will be affected. Panic rippled through the auditorium. Students whispered frantically to each other, their voices barely audible. What does he mean by flagged? One girl asked her friend. I think he means colleges and jobs, her friend replied, looking pale. Jake raised his hand hesitantly, hoping to defend himself. Sir, he stammered, we didn't mean… You didn't mean what? Mr. Kane interrupted, his voice cutting like a knife. You didn't mean to humiliate my son? You didn't mean to physically assault him? You didn't mean to destroy his sense of safety in this school? Jake lowered his hand, his face burning with shame. Mr. Kane wasn't yelling, but his quiet fury was far more terrifying than any shout. Turning his attention back to the rest of the audience, Mr. Kane added, and let this serve as a warning to anyone else who thinks bullying is acceptable. If I find out about similar behavior in the future, I will take action. I assure you I have the resources and the determination to ensure justice is served. By the time he finished speaking, the atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted entirely. Respect replaced mockery and fear replaced indifference. Students who had once laughed at Lucas now avoided looking at him altogether. Teachers scribbled notes furiously, already planning how to address bullying in their classrooms. Principal Harris sat frozen in her seat, clutching her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. After the assembly ended, the school buzzed with nervous energy. Students gathered in clusters discussing what had just happened. Some tried to justify their actions, while others apologized profusely to anyone who would listen. Jake and his friends huddled near the lockers, their usual swagger replaced by defeated slouches. Meanwhile, Lucas remained quiet. He didn't gloat or seek revenge. Instead, he walked calmly through the hallways, his head held higher than usual. People stepped aside to let him pass, afraid to get too close. It was as if an invisible shield surrounded him, a shield forged by his father's authority and reputation. Teachers scrambled to prepare for the fallout. Parent-teacher meetings were scheduled, disciplinary actions were reviewed, and new policies were drafted overnight. The administration realized they couldn't ignore the problem anymore, not when someone like Alexander Kane was watching. That evening, phone calls rang throughout Ridgewood. Parents demanded answers from their children, while others called the school to plead for leniency. Social media exploded with posts about the incident, some defending Lucas and others criticizing the bullies. By midnight, the story had spread beyond the town, reaching local news outlets and online forums. For the first time in its history, Ridgewood High found itself at the center of attention, and not in a good way. The days following Mr. Alexander Kane's visit were unlike anything Ridgewood High had ever experienced. Fear hung thick in the air, heavier than the humidity of a summer storm. Students tiptoed through the hallways, afraid to make eye contact with each other or draw attention to themselves. Teachers enforced stricter rules, handing out detentions for even minor infractions like chewing gum or whispering during class. The once lively school felt more like a prison, where every action was scrutinized and every word could be used against you. But it wasn't just fear that defined those days. It was guilt. For many students, especially those involved in bullying, Lucas, sleep became elusive. Jake tossed and turned at night, replaying the video footage in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of himself laughing as he shoved Lucas into his friends. What if colleges saw that tape? What if future employers found out? His dreams of playing football in college suddenly seemed distant, almost impossible. Other bullies faced similar struggles. Some tried to justify their actions by telling themselves they hadn't meant any real harm. Others convinced themselves that Lucas deserved it, that he was too weird, too quiet, too different. But deep down they knew better. They remembered how scared Lucas must have felt when they surrounded him, how powerless he looked when he hit the floor. And now, thanks to Mr. Kane, they couldn't escape the consequences of their choices. Parents weren't spared either. When news of the incident reached home, households across Ridgewood erupted in arguments. "Why would you do something so stupid?" one mother screamed at her son, slamming a copy of the surveillance photos on the kitchen table. Another father sat, silently, his face buried in his hands, wondering how he had failed to teach his child right from wrong. Phone calls flooded the school office, some pleading for mercy and others demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Lucas remained an enigma. He didn't gloat about his father's intervention or seek revenge against those who had hurt him. Instead, he carried himself with quiet dignity, attending classes, completing assignments, and keeping to himself as usual. If anything changed, it was the way people treated him. Former bullies avoided him completely, ducking into empty classrooms whenever they saw him coming. Even teachers gave him extra attention, calling on him in class and praising his work, as if trying to make up for past neglect. Curiosity eventually got the better of some students. One afternoon, a boy named Ethan approached Lucas during lunch. Ethan wasn't part of the popular crowd. He was just another kid who wanted answers. "Hey, Lucas," he said cautiously, sitting down across from him. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas glanced up from his book, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked simply. "Well," Ethan hesitated, unsure how to phrase his question. "Your dad, he's really powerful, isn't he? Like super rich and all that?" Lucas closed his book and leaned back slightly, studying Ethan for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." Ethan nodded nervously, then blurted out, "Doesn't it bother you, though, having everyone act differently around you because of him?" To Ethan's surprise, Lucas smiled faintly. It wasn't a smirk or a sneer, it was genuine, almost sympathetic. "I get it," Lucas said softly. "People are scared, but it's not my dad they should be afraid of. It's what happens when they treat someone badly and think they can get away with it." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Lucas sighed and looked away, his gaze drifting toward the window. "My dad didn't always have money or power," he explained. "When he was younger, he was bullied too, just like me. People pushed him around, called him names, made him feel worthless. But instead of letting it break him, he used it to become stronger. He worked hard, learned everything he could, and built a life where no one could hurt him anymore." Ethan listened intently, realizing there was more to Lucas and his father than met the eye. "So, does your dad hate bullies because of what happened to him?" he asked. Lucas shook his head. "Not exactly. He doesn't hate them, he understands them. He knows why they do it. But he also believes everyone deserves a chance to change. That's why he came here, not to punish people, but to show them what happens when they cross the line." The first time, Ethan saw Lucas not as a victim or an outsider, but as someone wise beyond his years. "Do you think people will actually change?" he asked. Lucas shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But at least now they know there's a price for being cruel." As the weeks passed, Ridgewood High began to transform. Inspired by Mr. Kane's stern yet fair approach, the administration implemented new anti-bullying policies. Teachers received training on how to recognize and address harassment, while students participated in workshops designed to foster empathy and kindness. Victims found courage to speak up, knowing their voices would finally be heard. Even Jake and his friends started to change, or at least pretend to. They stopped picking on weaker students and joined volunteer programs in an effort to repair their damaged reputations. Whether their newfound behavior was genuine or performative, no one could say for sure. But what mattered was the shift in the school's culture. Slowly, Ridgewood became a safer place. Not just for Lucas, but for everyone. Through it all, Lucas remained unchanged. He still preferred solitude, finding comfort in books and quiet corners of the library. Yet there was a subtle difference in the way he carried himself. He stood taller, spoke louder, and met people's gazes with confidence. Gone was the timid boy who had arrived 3 weeks earlier. In his place stood someone who commanded respect, not through fear, but through resilience. One day, as Lucas walked home from school, he noticed Matt, the same boy who had spread rumors about his family, standing outside his house. Matt looked nervous, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. When he saw Lucas approaching, he stepped forward awkwardly. "Hey, Lucas," Matt said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About everything. I shouldn't have said those things about you or your dad." Lucas stopped walking and studied Matt for a moment. Then, without hesitation, he extended his hand. "Apology accepted," he said simply. Matt blinked in surprise, then shook Lucas's hand, relief washing over his face. As Lucas continued toward his house, he couldn't help but smile. Revenge might have been satisfying, but forgiveness felt far better. By the end of the semester, Ridgewood High was almost unrecognizable. The once hostile hallways were quieter, filled with less laughter, but also fewer tears. Students who had once ruled the school with intimidation now walked cautiously, aware that their actions carried consequences. Teachers reported fewer incidents of bullying, and even the cliques seemed to soften their edges. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was progress. And much of that progress could be traced back to Lucas and his father's visit. For Lucas, life became easier in some ways but more complicated in others. He no longer had to endure taunts or shoves in the hallway. Instead, he faced a different kind of attention. Some students treated him like royalty, offering compliments and favors in an effort to stay on his good side. Others avoided him entirely, too afraid of what might happen if they crossed him. But despite the mixed reactions, one thing remained constant. Lucas stayed true to himself. He didn't seek popularity or approval. Instead, he continued doing what made him happy, reading books, working on projects, and spending time alone. Still, there were moments when Lucas opened up to those brave enough to approach him. Over lunch one day, he shared another surprising truth about his father with Ethan and a few other curious classmates. "You know," Lucas said, leaning forward slightly, "my dad isn't just powerful because of money or influence. He's powerful because he doesn't let people walk all over him anymore." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucas explained. "When my dad was bullied as a kid, it hurt him deeply. But instead of staying angry or bitter, he used that pain to motivate himself. He worked harder than anyone else, learned how to stand up for himself, and built a life where no one could push him around again. That's why he came here, to show people that being cruel has consequences. But he also wanted to remind them that they can change if they choose to." The group listened intently, realizing that Mr. Alexander Kane wasn't just a figure of authority, he was a symbol of resilience. His story resonated with many students, especially those who had been bullied themselves. They began to see bullying, not as something inevitable, but as a choice, one that could either define them or destroy them. Inspired by this revelation, some students decided to take action. A group of seniors organized an anti-bullying campaign called Be the Change. They created posters, hosted assemblies, and encouraged their peers to speak out against cruelty. Even Jake, who had once led the charge against Lucas, joined the effort. At first, his involvement raised eyebrows, but over time, people saw that he was sincere. He apologized publicly during a school assembly, admitting his mistakes and urging others to learn from them. Though it didn't erase the past, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, for him and for the school. Teachers noticed the shift too. Mrs. Carter, the English teacher, assigned her class an essay on the theme of redemption. To her surprise, nearly every student wrote passionately about second chances and personal growth. One particularly moving essay came from Matt, who described how meeting Lucas had changed his perspective. "I used to think power meant hurting others," Matt wrote, "but now I know real strength comes from treating people with kindness, even when it's hard." As the year drew to a close, Ridgewood High held its annual award ceremony. Among the accolades given for academic excellence and athletic achievement was a new award, the Courage Award. Principal Harris presented it to Lucas, citing his quiet bravery in the face of adversity. When his name was announced, the entire auditorium erupted into applause, a stark contrast to the silence that had greeted him on his first day. Lucas accepted the award humbly, thanking the audience briefly before stepping off the stage. Later, when asked how he felt about the recognition, he shrugged. "It's nice," he admitted, "but it's not why I did what I did. I just wanted to survive high school without losing myself. Turns out I gained something instead. That something was respect, not the kind earned through fear, but the kind built on understanding and empathy." By standing firm in the face of cruelty, Lucas had inspired others to do the same, and though he never sought to be a hero, he had become one nonetheless. Meanwhile, Mr. Alexander Kane kept tabs on the situation from afar. He didn't interfere further after his initial visit, trusting that his message had been received loud and clear. Still, he checked in with Lucas regularly, asking about school and encouraging him to keep pushing forward. During one such conversation, Lucas asked his father a question that had weighed on his mind for weeks. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "do you think people will ever really change? Or are they just pretending because they're scared of you?" Mr. Kane smiled faintly, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Some will pretend at first," he replied. "But fear isn't a bad place to start. It forces people to reflect on their actions. Whether they truly change depends on whether they decide to confront their own flaws. All we can do is give them the opportunity to try." Lucas nodded thoughtfully, absorbing his father's words. For the first time, he understood the deeper purpose behind Mr. Kane's intervention. It wasn't just about protecting him. It was about teaching others the value of accountability and compassion. As summer approached, Ridgewood High prepared for a fresh start. New policies ensured that bullying would no longer go unnoticed, while ongoing workshops helped students develop healthier relationships. Even the football team, once notorious for its arrogance, adopted a motto: "Strength through unity." Posters bearing these words hung in locker rooms and classrooms alike, serving as a reminder of how far the school had come. For Lucas, the future looked brighter than ever. He had survived his toughest year yet, and emerged stronger for it. Though he still preferred solitude, he found joy in small connections, with Ethan, who had become a loyal friend, with teachers who appreciated his quiet brilliance, and even with strangers, who occasionally thanked him for inspiring them to be better. On the last day of school, as Lucas walked out of Ridgewood High for the final time that year, he paused to glance back at the building. It wasn't perfect, it probably never would be, but it was trying, and sometimes trying was enough. With a small smile, Lucas turned away and headed home, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, he had already proven that resilience could overcome cruelty, and that forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds.